All right, welcome back. This is the Joint Legislative Child Protection Oversight Committee, October 1st, and we are back live for our afternoon agenda. This afternoon, we're focusing on children's residential treatment programs, and we've had concerns in the Senate and I think also in the House about the recent issues related to Kern-Hatton. And we know that Kern-Hatton was licensed as an approved independent school, and that license has since been withdrawn. We also know that Kern-Hatton held a license from the Department of Children and Families as a residential treatment program, but that Kern-Hatton agreed to voluntarily relinquish that license. So today, the concern that we've had as we've taken testimony in our committees over the past year is that there are children at these residential programs, and there is no, literally, there's no state oversight unless someone makes a complaint about child abuse and neglect at that school or that is the residential facility. So we're trying to understand what we can do as legislators to ensure that children who come to this state from within the state or from other states or from other parts of the globe, what can we do to provide some oversight and an assurance that those children are being cared for properly? So what we're going to look at today is the licensing process of treatment programs from DCF. Deputy Commissioner Erica Radke will be taking us through that process. Then we'll also be getting an update from Emily Simmons, the General Counsel for the AOE, about what does it mean about school certification for these facilities. So this is a difficult topic, and we'll also get an update on Kern from one of the lawyers who is representing children who did attend Kern-Hatton. So it's a full afternoon, and keep in mind that our goal isn't necessarily to rehash the episodes that have happened at Kern-Hatton, but simply to understand what it means for the state when there is no oversight from either AOE or DCF, and what, if anything, can this committee recommend to ensure that we do have some would say we have a role to play. So it's more complicated than that, as we will find out, but why don't we go ahead? I know that some of you have not had an opportunity to hear testimony in this area, so this is the beginning for us in this oversight committee. And we will come back to this topic again at our next meeting or the meeting after, so that we can make some recommendations, whatever recommendations or not we decide to make. So, all right, Deputy Commissioner Radke, thank you for being here again. You're a permanent member of the committee, I think. But we see that you have information for us on licensing residential treatment programs, and unless the committee member, any committee member has something they'd like to say at this point or a question, then thank you. We'll go right ahead and allow for you to present the information that you have.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. General Counsel Micah is going to help me by advancing the slides. Jennifer, can you get the slides up?
I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that, and I don't know that I have control of it. Was I given control for that?
Yes, yes, she was.
I'm sorry, I've
We
never
love
done that before, so I'm not really sure how to do that.
Let me
I
see.
apologize, Erica. I didn't realize I was going to be doing that.
Oh, okay.
Peggy, can you put the slide? Yeah, I think our committee assistant, our very able assistant can put the slides up for you, and then
Oh.
you just let her know. Just give
Thank
me a
you.
sec to
Thanks.
get to it. Okay.
Perfect. Just for the record, again, my name is Erica Radke, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Family Services Division of DCF. And I've been asked by the committee to testify about, in general, the division's process for licensing residential treatment programs. And DCF General Counsel Jennifer Micah is here as well to help out with answering any questions the committee may have. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the first question is, who does the licensing for residential programs in Vermont? And the licensing is handled by the Residential Licensing and Special Investigations Unit, also known as RLSI. RLSI is a specialized unit housed in the Family Services Division, which of course sits within DCF. Next slide. The RLSI director reports to an operations manager within FSD. The director oversees 4 teams, 2 assigned to cover the northern and southern parts of the state. And there's also the agency team and the administrative team. And the 2 primary functions of RLSI are to license and regulate places where children in FSD custody reside and to conduct special investigations under the umbrella of child safety interventions. Next slide. So RLSI regulates 4 general entities: residential treatment programs, commissioner designated shelters, child placing agencies, and foster homes. But they also conduct special investigations in schools, camps, churches, daycare facilities, and other settings where they would need to come in to do special child welfare type investigations. So the focus of today's presentation is about licensing residential programs, which is handled by the agency team, which is comprised of 1 supervisor and 2 family services workers. They are responsible for regulating to date 21 residential treatment programs, 11 child placing agencies, and 10 commissioner designated shelters.
How many children are represented within those different regulated licensed places?
Let's see, I did have that. It is roughly, I can pull that up if you, I can answer that at the end, because I did ask that question. I just don't have the number at my fingertips, but I have it in an email.
Okay.
So the agency team, they do have a great deal of contact with residential treatment programs that care for the children in custody. The team conducts routine residential licensing visits to ensure compliance with regulations. They conduct child abuse and neglect assessment investigations, and they also have regulatory interventions in response to specific incidents or reports that might evidence a regulatory violation in a particular program. The team is also available for consultation with residential treatment programs And the unit really likes to keep the lines of communication open to answer general questions, discuss requests for variances and regulations, and also just to assist programs preemptively in order to avoid problems with compliance later on. Next slide, please.
You did this one already? Is this the right slide or?
Oh, hello? Can you hear
Yes,
me?
is that the right? Yes.
Okay, hold on here. I think we got mixed up somehow.
Should we go back?
Yeah, let's
What's
go
the
back.
title?
Let's go back one.
Okay.
Here it is. Okay, now I need you to go to 7. Slide number 7.
This slide 7 out of 11. What my screen says at least.
Okay, perfect.
Is it?
That's it. That's perfect. My computer is giving me some trouble here. Okay, so the RLSI receives a lot of complaints or reports from many different sources. Oftentimes, they end up conducting concurrent regulatory interventions alongside of child safety interventions. And the agency supervisor is the one that determines whether or not acceptance of a report is appropriate for regulatory intervention. If pursuant to the intervention, a program is found to not have any regulatory violations, then the program's in compliance. If the program is out of compliance, there are a number of steps that can be taken in order to address the situation, including instituting a corrective action plan. Next slide, please. So the licensing and residential treatment program, licensing of these programs is really a multi-step process. But in a nutshell, what happens is a program will send an application for licensing to our RLSI unit, which will schedule and conduct an on-site licensing visit, which generally will take about 2 to 3 days. And during the visit, the team will review all the regulatory and child safety interventions and afterwards issue a licensing report. A residential treatment program license are issued every 2 years, but on the off year, the agency team still conducts an on-site visit just to ensure that DCF presence is in the facility at least annually.
And just to clarify, these visits can only take place if there are children in the facility who are under the authority of DCF.
No, remember how I was talking about sometimes they can come in for daycare centers or camps. If there's a report of some kind of ongoing potential harm to a child, an investigation can occur under those situations too. But in terms of actual residential programs, you're correct.
Okay.
How many reports have they had to respond to this year?
The last year I saw was about 400 reports, but I can get you a more accurate number.
No, you don't need to. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. You don't need to. 400 reports, and we have a supervisor and 2 or 3 workers. Okay, that's all I need to know. Thank you.
Next slide, please. The licensing visit for a residential treatment program consists of an opening meeting, a tour of the facility, child and staff interviews, and a review of child and staff personnel files. And all these activities are really done to ensure continuity, such as, is there continuity between the program's program description and their therapeutic interventions that they actually offer? Do these programs actually align with the population of children they're supposed to serve? The team is also looking for continuity between child files reviewed and the children interviewed, such as how the child presents or what they report, and does that match up with what's in the child's file? And the team is also searching for continuity between personnel files and the staff interviewed, such as does the staff have the right experience and training for the role they're in? And does that correspond to the documents that are actually in the personnel file? Next slide, please. So out of the licensing visit comes the licensing report. And each section of the report provides a narrative portion outlining the qualitative information gathered through the interviews and the file reviews. But the report also lists the ratings determined for each RTP regulation. And there are 3 possible ratings: compliance, compliance with reservations, and non-compliance. And a corrective action plan may be developed for regulations rated as compliance with reservations or non-compliance. And all of the report findings are presented to the program in a licensing debrief meeting, which is designed to be a conversation between the program and the team to explain the ratings, to provide direct feedback from the individuals interviewed, and to advise of different licensing parameters. And that's all we have for the prepared comments, but Jennifer and I would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
So thank you. This is a great outline of the process. I'll have one question. I think there'll be other questions from others. So with the frequency being once every 2 years for the sort of the investigation or the oversight that takes place, the visits, are the institutions told when when folks are coming in for the 2 or 3 days that how much time are they given for preparation and how much latitude do they have in talking with kids and teachers and others?
I do believe they are aware of the licensing visit, and the team is given a lot of latitude in terms of speaking to the children and the staff and looking into those personnel files and the children's files. And I think that's why it takes 2 to 3 days, because they really do an in-depth review of what's going on, in addition to any other prior licensing problems that may have occurred. And Jennifer, you have anything to add?
No, I think that covered it. Thank you.
Jennifer, or I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Deputy Commissioner or Jennifer, could you send us what DCF policy 241 is? I'm not familiar with the language of that policy.
Absolutely.
And thank you.
So yeah, so just maybe an explanation. So there's legislation that allows for the investigation to take place and links DCF and these residential facilities. Then there's a policy, a department policy around this. Then are there rules or guidelines in addition to the policy?
This is Jennifer Micah, General Counsel for DCF. Do you mean rules and policies around how RLSI does its work?
Yes. In addition to the policy, do you have like a handbook or a set of rules or guidelines for these investigations?
To be honest, I'm not sure, but I'd be happy to talk to people at RLSI to find out.
That would be helpful, because it may be that it's the rules that we're interested in. We don't know what the policy is. Obviously, if it's a complaint-driven process, that's one thing. And right now, at least for Kern-Hatton, it is a complaint-driven process. There's no entryway for the state at this point.
I'm wondering if Katie, and did I miss this when I was out? And if I did, I apologize. Is there any statutory direction around this part of the role of DCF?
Jennifer?
Yes, there is. It's under Title 33, Chapter 49.
Oh, Katie's here too. Katie, I didn't see you. I would acknowledge you. Go ahead.
I'm here. Katie McGlynn, Office of Legislative Counsel. So there are really two statutes that address licensing. The first is 33, Section 306, entitled Administrative Provisions, and it's sort of general statutory language for all the programs that DCF licenses. It's not specific to residential treatment programs, but it, has general guidance that a person who accepts a license shall permit visits and inspections and examinations, and that before a license is granted, the department shall visit and inspect the premises. So that's one section. And then there's also a second section, and that's 33 VSA 3501. And again, this language is entitled Foster Care and Placement Licensing, and it discusses a need for a DCF license to house foster children, for example, for 15 consecutive days without a license. It says that you need a license to house a foster child for 15 more days in a agency. So two statutes, they're very general, they're not specific. In addition, there are administrative rules on residential treatment programs. So there are the rules, and then more specific than the rules is the policy 241 that has already been mentioned. So there's really kind of at least three sets of documents that provide some guidance as to the regulatory structure around residential treatment programs. In terms of your question, Senator Lyons, as to whether there are any more specific documents about how to conduct an investigation, I haven't seen them, but I also wouldn't be the first person to go to. That would have to come from the agency.
Well, it would be good to know, but now I understand. So the policy 241 is more specific than the rules. Okay. That's helpful. And then the question that you just reminded me is there anything more specific than policy 241? Okay. And is there anything in the DCF policy or statute other than child abuse and neglect that allows for the department to investigate or to make presence known in these facilities?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? I'm not sure I understand your question.
Sure. Is there anything in the rules or the policy that allows for the DCF to investigate or to investigate other than a complaint around child abuse and neglect?
If there's no license, you mean?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
Do you mean if there's no license involved, like a like a
Yeah,
residential
if there's
school
no,
that's not,
I mean, for example, yeah, if there's no license, there's no opportunity for DCF to be involved unless there's a complaint of child abuse and neglect, or maybe a mandatory reporter didn't do his or her job.
that's correct. We are,
Okay.
we are a complaint-driven process in that situation.
Okay.
I
And
agree.
how many, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I said I was agreeing. That seems to be really the only other mechanism in order to get in.
So going back then to, I think Representative Pugh's question on numbers of complaints that we've seen in those organizations or facilities that are not licensed by the state. Have you segregated out complaints for those not licensed facilities, unlicensed?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Do you have data on how many complaints have been made about facilities that are not licensed? So these residential facilities that are not licensed by the state?
I don't believe we have that data. I will double check with RLSI, but I'm pretty sure they don't have that.
Okay.
And that is largely because the complaints have to do with the particular perpetrator and the victim. So it would be logged as a complaint against the person committing the offense or the victimization rather than the institution. The statute requires that there be a person who's committing the victimization. That's how we define a abused or neglected child as somebody who's been victimized by a person rather than an institution.
I have one more question. When the investigators go to the facilities and they review the case files for the kids and so on, do they also look at they're supposed to look at the educational training that's present. They're supposed to look at other aspects of the facility. So how thorough are those investigations? Do we have a sense that those policies that are in place in these residential facilities are robust enough to protect children adequately?
And reviewing the information, I'm actually very impressed with the amount of detail and how thorough the investigations are, starting with having a tour of the facility before they even dig into the files and talk to the children and the staff. And they've all been trained to, what to look for in terms of problems. I mean, the RLSI staff in particular are seasoned social workers, generally from the front lines that have moved to RLSI. So these are individuals that really know the system well. And then on top of that, understand the licensing requirements. So in addition to just the strength of the staff, the type of work that they're doing, I think these are definitely thorough assessments. And then the fact that they keep those lines of communications open so that if there's a potential problem, they can come in and nip it in the bud early before it becomes a significant issue.
Can I?
Go ahead, Senator.
Yeah, I totally agree with the deputy commissioner that DCF, my experience with DCF licensing has been nothing but professional and well done. And Jennifer, I think, pointed to the problem. If there was a complaint at a residential school that is not licensed by DCF, but there was a complaint of child abuse, that might not lead anyone to investigate the institution as it's in its own right. Rather, it leaves it to some other organization. And I think that's the gap that might need to be filled. And I don't know whether that's legislation or rule, but if teacher X at school that's residential, but not licensed by DCF and not licensed by the Department of Education, and there's a complaint, what happens? It's just that, and I think what Jennifer said, it's just the individual who was complained about, not necessarily the institution. And I think that's a gap that we've created.
Well, it'll be, yeah, I think you're right. I think it'll be important to look at the statute, what it says. And then whether or not we expect model policies at these facilities, you know.
And of more concern, learning from Kern Hatton, there was a pattern of not reporting. So they allegedly I don't know if it's even alleged, facts are they influence kids to not say anything through intimidation or whatever. And then even staff that knew about the allegations wouldn't report. So there was no reporting. And once DCF left, then there's nothing there.
Well, and then that really gets us to the question of why they withdrew their request for licensure. And we have never really gotten to the negotiation process that took place between DCF and Kern Hatton. I don't know that we will ever get to that, but we might try to.
But if it occurred in another program, you know, that's my concern, that we've left the gap. There are many programs or many residential schools in Vermont that are not licensed by DCF, that aren't at residential treatment programs. So they're not licensed by DCF. We don't know, but may go or may not. You have all the allegations in New Hampshire about several schools and Massachusetts, private schools.
Exactly, and we read about or at least I read about a school in Vermont with concerns recently. All right, committee questions for around the licensure process for Deputy Commissioner Key and Jennifer. Mike, go ahead.
So you said you have a fairly small staff doing this, and between the complaints and the regular licensing and off-year visits, are you able to keep up with just the regular licensing duties outside of the number of complaints?
I mean, I think in general, people would like an additional staff member, but it has not gotten to the issue where they're not able to get done what we need done. And that's even given the sometimes emergent issues that pop up that really tend to require intense focus and time.
In your presentation, you also listed special investigations. Can you tell us what those are? And that might, I don't know if that relates to Representative Pahala's question or not, but what are the special investigations?
Jennifer, do you want to field that one? The special investigations?
I don't have a sense of I don't have a sense that it is anything particularly different other than the same types of investigations. It's just to clarify that it's not just licensing.
It's more of the child abuse and neglect issues. And sometimes we may be called in to do investigations of other agencies where there might be a conflict of interest. We do those as well.
Okay, let me ask another question. So are the investigations that are going on for the facilities and complaints within the facilities, is that the same team that's going out for special investigations to individual families?
No, those are separate teams. There's
okay.
agency team, and then there's the other team that does the foster care investigations.
Okay,
And they're cut up in, one team handles one half of the state and the other team handles the other half of the state.
and we're a small state.
So,
Go ahead, Representative Pugh.
I'm sorry, I'm confused. I believe on your PowerPoint, you had one director and two staff,
One supervisor
one
and
one
two
supervisor and
family service workers.
two family service workers. Are those the teams you're talking about?
That's for
So
the
one family service goes, so the team is one family service worker has the north and the other has the south of Vermont. That's the team.
No. The agency team has the one supervisor and the two workers, and then the north team and the south team that handle the state. I believe there are 3 workers per each team and a supervisor. And then the administrative team, it has their own staff as well.
Okay, so what we have listed here is the agency team. So those are the more of the administrative.
So those are the people in Waterbury.
Yeah.
Then the agency team, that's the one that does the program licensing, since I knew we were focusing more on that licensing as opposed to licensing foster care homes and things like that.
Okay.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, as we're listening and as questions are being asked, I think it's going to make sense for us to have our ledge counsel, Katie McClin, go through the statutes with us that regulate this area. And then we're going to want to look at the policy 241, and maybe it'll be fun to go through the rules. I go through rules all the time, but others might enjoy it as well. I think it, or not. But I think it'd be helpful to do that. Just trying to understand what, if anything, could be provided to ensure that when we're not looking at a licensed facility, that the kids are, there's some oversight for the children. I don't know what else we can get out of this right now, but we'll have more questions for the department.
So you're talking about not right now.
No.
But at another time.
Right, we're not doing that right now. This is, I'm just laying out a next step for us. And go ahead.
I'm sorry, I interrupted, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Did you have something to say?
I just want to say, in preparing the presentation and talking to members of the RLSI team, they expressed the same feelings that you all have indicated in terms of just the limitation of the regulations in terms of when they're able to go in and do investigations, when there is no license and their hands are sort of tied, because they spend a lot of time going into these programs and getting to know the youth, and they understand your concern and they share them.
Well, any suggestions that those folks could make would be welcome and very helpful to our discussion, because we will be looking to make recommendations for improvement in that area.
Thank you.
All right, that's good. Any other questions, committee? Senator Sears, all set?
No. No,
Okay.
set, thank you.
All right, well, good. Thank you again. We'll be back. I know we'll be back together. We now have additional members of our committee, and we very much appreciate your time. So thank you for that input.
Thank you very much.
And we're going to move to the Agency of Education and Certification. And I guess the question that we asked, Emily Simmons is here. There you are. Good to see you again. Welcome. And we asked, what does it mean if a school does not receive certification? And then what does oversight look like? And you've heard our discussion, because we do understand that the Agency of Education, we'll just say de-licensed, I don't know, de-approved Kern Hatton and.
Who did?
Yeah. Not yet. You will have to bring us up to speed on that one. Thank you. And then where is that right now? And then you've heard our concerns. So go right ahead.
Thank you. For the record, Emily Simmons, General Counsel, Agency of Education. And yes, I prepared today to speak to your two questions. What is certification and what does oversight look like? So to start, I think we'll all have trouble concentrating if I don't answer the question that just came up that was not on the agenda, which is just to update you at a very high level about the agency's investigation of Kern Hatton. And I'll leave that at a very high level until you have questions for me. How does that sound?
Sounds good. We don't have anything from you on our webpage yet. Can we get something in writing? Can we get some testimony that we could post?
Sure. It sounds like, to
Okay.
dive right now, it sounds like we ought to send you the written public report that the agency produced in regard to Kern Hatton. That sounds like that ought to be part of the record. It's been shared publicly. In that report, agency staff advised the Secretary of Education their findings of an investigation into Kern Hatton's compliance with statutes that apply to approved independent schools and state board rules that apply to approved independent schools. The Secretary has the role in state board rule to conduct such investigations and make a determination whether the Secretary will make a formal recommendation to the state board that the state board ought to have a hearing on revoking or suspending approval status of a school. So that is the process that's available for enforcement of the statutes and rules that apply to all approved independent schools. In this case, the Secretary, upon receiving the report from agency staff, determined that there was not a need for the state board to hold a revocation hearing. Instead, the Secretary required 2 follow-up compliance checks from Kern Hatton, one close to the start of the school year this year and one to be conducted in the spring. So sitting here today, we're right in the middle of 2, I'll just call them check-ins with Kern Hatton about particular remediation that the agency required, or that the Secretary of Education required in his determination to not recommend a hearing to the state board. So to totally back up, because for committee members who weren't part of this conversation in the spring, all of that is using some terminology that I really wanted to explain to you today. There's approval of independent schools, and there are independent schools who are recognized. And when I say independent schools, that's the word that we use for private schools in Vermont. So to start at the very bottom, and we have our truancy requirements for school-age children. In order for parents and guardians to meet the truancy requirements, a student has got to be enrolled in public school or in an approved independent school or in a school that is called recognized. Those are the 3 places that you can satisfy the truancy requirements. The lightest touch that the agency and the state board are given in statute is over recognized independent schools. Recognized independent schools are required to submit an enrollment notice to be registered essentially with the Agency of Education. They are required by law to follow the mandatory reporting statute, to conduct the required background checks of staff, and to comply with the health and safety fire code type regulations that apply to schools. They also are required to certify that they offer the state's minimum course of study. And those are essentially the main requirements of a recognized independent school. It's a short list of assurances and requirements compared to the next category of school, which would be the approved independent schools. The main distinction between being approved and recognized is that an approved independent school can receive publicly funded tuition. So for students that live in school districts that pay tuition rather than operating their own public school for those students, you can go to a public school or an approved independent school. You cannot take that tuition to a recognized independent school. All students in recognized schools pay their tuition privately. So those are the tiers.
There's a question. There's a question.
Sorry, Emily. What kind of school is Kern-Hatton
Approved.
approved? So tell me again what approved means.
Approved schools can educate students who are receiving publicly funded tuition. So students.
Okay, so we are sending, so the State Board of Ed or the Department of Education has agreed or whatever. Kern-Hatton is an approved residential public school, correct? And at the same time, what?
It's only an approved independent school.
Kids stay there overnight, don't they?
Correct.
And this is the same school where there were reports that I thought were confirmed of abuse. And they're no longer licensed by the state of Vermont. And the department, the Agency of Education thinks it's fine to spend public dollars there.
That's not my testimony, Representative Pugh. The school was determined to be in compliance with the rules that apply to approved independent schools, the state board rules, and the statutes that apply to approved independent schools. Very important to the implications of your questions are that those requirements are geared entirely to the educational program of a school and are not on their face geared to residential elements of school, although there are practical overlaps, such as the qualifications of staff who would work in both the day program and the residential program. The other element of the Kern-Hatton situation is that in recent school years, just because of tuitioning patterns and parent choice, no Vermont students who receive public tuition, who live in tuition towns, attend Kern-Hatton on a residential basis. There have been one student here, one student there who have attended as day students. Very small numbers of day students in the past few years.
Is there a, go ahead, Senator Sears, because I'm going to, you go ahead.
No, I'm still perplexed here. Somebody starts a school and there is no oversight over that education program unless kids are being sent by a public school. Is that right? I mean, unless kids in towns are paying tuition. So Kimball Union Academy, which is how does that get covered by the state?
In a totally different set of principles, Senator Sears, schools that are outside of Vermont's borders are eligible for tuition.
No, Kimball Union is in Vermont, I believe. In the Saxon River. No, it's not.
There's a Vermont.
Oh, Vermont Academy. Yeah,
Yes,
it's actually, yeah, Vermont Academy. I'm sorry. Vermont Academy. You might-
Vermont Academy, off the top of my head, without checking our directory, is an approved independent school, or assume that I've got that correctly. It applies through the agency, demonstrating compliance with the state board's rules and the statutes. The agency evaluates that application and makes a recommendation to the state board, who actually takes the action to grant approval or not. Once approval is granted, it lasts for a period of no more than 5 years, and then the school comes up for renewal. So there's a periodic review of all approved independent schools through the regular application process. In between those renewal cycles, the agency interacts with these schools when there are complaints or when there are reports made to the agency that lead us to find noncompliance. And we have a state board rule where we refer the school to the state board for a hearing on revocation of its approval status following an investigation. More commonly, the school comes into compliance once being alerted to the statute. There was ignorance of the rule, and the school very quickly comes into compliance upon the agency making contact. And we haven't gone to hearings for that level of noncompliance.
So I'm thinking of what we might do. That sounded like a dog. I think what we might do is, we did invite Jim Demery to come in and talk with us a little bit about the education statutes, but we might do that at a future meeting. So we can maybe just look and see what's there, and if there's anything that strikes us as needing some improvements or have gaps for greater protection of kids in these facilities. We don't want to step into the education committee necessarily, but we are a child protection oversight committee, so I feel comfortable
I don't
having some.
know. What's not clear to me is what resources. You know, we heard quite a description of the resources that DCF has for investigation, but what resources the Agency of Education has to investigate schools and et cetera, and complaints about particularly residential schools. That's not clear to me.
Sure,
Maybe that could.
The agency has 2 full-time staff who work on the independent school approval, renewal, compliance issues. There are also, I would say, 4 staff who spend time as needed, but are not specifically tasked to independent schools. It's that group that is pulled together when an investigation is needed. And it was many of that group were involved, for instance, on the Kern-Hatton report.
So when you say state board, I'm sorry, there's some feedback there. The state board isn't really doing the investigation. The agency staff is, but it's a state board responsibility to determine whether they should keep their license or not. Thank you.
That's correct.
But the investigation that's going on, correct me here, the investigation is going on is for the educational programs. What, if any, investigations does AOE ever do around child abuse and neglect and bullying or related issues?
Sure, good question. To start with child abuse and neglect, the agency would not directly investigate a complaint of child abuse and neglect. We would just refer that to DCF and stand by. Once DCF has concluded their investigation, they'll generally tell us basically all clear. We're very careful to not interfere or make direct contact with the school because we're afraid of upsetting the DCF investigation. However, our follow-up across the board when we know, because BCF informs us that there has been a report in an approved independent school, is to make contact with the school's administration, determine if the reporting procedures were followed, and to determine if any licensed educators were involved. It is possible that there are licensed educators in independent schools, although the schools are not required to employ licensed educators. They typically have some licensed educators. We would have the duty to investigate that person's teaching license and take action if appropriate under the licensing standards. So that's child abuse and neglect. For harassment, hazing, or bullying, we would first confirm that the school had followed the state required policy and procedures on HHB prevention, provide assistance to the student or family in making the right contacts at the school to make a report, to request an independent review of the school's actions if that is available. And then the agency receives all independent reports and follows up. And if we see non-compliance, we would undertake an investigation that might lead to a hearing on approval status. But it might also not be as serious and result in assistance to the school follow-up to ensure compliance in the future.
Okay, thank you. Committee questions for Emily Simmons? Emily, so just to clarify, the investigation that you made around Kern-Hatton resulted in approval of the facility as an independent educational institution.
It resulted in no action so that the school retained its approval. The school's regular cycle of approval is up next spring. And so the school will be making its renewal application. There will be a site visit, as is normally done with renewal applications. But the investigation here led the secretary to not recommend any hearing action on to revoke their status as approved.
Okay. Were there any mandatory reports that were identified who might have been involved in the allegations who were identified by you, by the AOE, as having committed a misdemeanor?
No, we would not undertake a criminal investigation. That would be conducted by the police. The agency's report focused on the procedures, the written policies, the trainings around practices to ensure that reporting is required, there's training on reporting, and that when the school's policies for reporting are not followed, that there's employment action as a result.
Okay. Okay, going around one more time, committee, any questions?
No, because I'm flabbergasted.
Ditto.
Schools, every person in the school is a mandated reporter. I'm just flabbergasted, but then, I don't, yeah. You'd think we weren't part of the same state or the same state government.
Well,
I have
go ahead.
a clarification, I think. So you said that the approved independent school status approves the education piece of them being a school, but the residential piece doesn't fall under that approval. So, right, so is it correct to say that it doesn't fall under anyone's regulatory or licensing authority?
It is very nearly 100% accurate to say that, yes. The agency in the review of Kern-Hatton stretched the state board regulations as far as we could into the residential program. And Kern-Hatton completely understood that, but there are not state board rules or statutes that apply to approved independent schools that speak to requirements specific to the residential setting. So there are not requirements on the books about nighttime safety procedures. Just to take just one example, the agency was able to review many elements of Kern-Hatton's residential program through regulations that speak to qualifications of staff, requirement of mandatory reporting, requirements for background checks, these kinds of things that by their nature also flowed in to the residential program from the education program. But the important distinction is that they are written for education programs, and there's not anything written specifically for the residential element of a school in the education statutes or the state board rules.
And there's no, at this time, the DCF is gone right now, but at this stage of the game, the Kern-Hatton or a facility that is not licensed through DCF, but it is approved by AOE, there's no requirement, and correct me, but I'm asking the question. Is there a requirement to have counselors available to students who might need not just educational counseling, but mental health counseling or other services, related services?
There is no across the board requirement that would require a counselor. There might be students who have counseling services in their IEP, and that would be a requirement, but it's not directly required, no.
Okay. So if there is an IEP, if there is a special ed requirement, how does that fall into the oversight? I mean, I'm thinking of both of federal and state oversight. Is there anything there?
The Agency of Education has statewide oversight of all services to students with disabilities. First, or the more primary oversight would be the Students' Supervisory Union of Residents. Although the student is tuitioned, the SU retains the total responsibility for special education services. So they're providing it, they're required to follow all state and federal regulations. And then we as the agency have the statewide oversight to ensure that that's happening.
Okay. All right. I don't know if you can tell, but there's a significant amount of concern around the table regarding the safety of children who are at these facilities. Because I think of the way perhaps statutes have been structured or policies have been developed, and we will continue our discussion on how to improve oversight of kids when they're at residential facilities. So, you know, I thank you for your time. I know how hard you have worked on this. You worked all last year in the education committees, and I appreciate your taking the time to be with us today. That doesn't mean that we're thrilled with the way things are today. I think the status quo is something that needs to be unstatus quo. We need to.
Senator, don't put the agency down as thrilled either. We're very happy to see that you are looking into the statewide systems and where there are gaps. I think that's needed.
Okay, thank you. And I know, as I said, for the folks at DCF, if the folks who are working in your in the agency have suggestions that would help improve this process and would provide greater safety and protections for kids, we would welcome those suggestions.
Senator Lyons, there is a rule in development that I think you would all be interested to know about, knowing that it won't come to you until the LCAR stage of the rulemaking process. But the state board has the independent school rules open at this time. They're right in the middle of public comment hearings. One of the new rules would require a school, an approved school that has a residential, where it's called a boarding element in the rule, that has a boarding program to be accredited by a state board recognized accrediting agency. The most common agency that we're familiar with in Vermont is called MEASC. Those organizations have standards and make site visits and expertise around boarding programs at private schools. And so that's the state board's planned step, because they've been through this process just like the rest of us have. They are putting forward that rule to require accreditation for any Vermont private school seeking approval with a boarding program.
All right, thank you. And, you know, I'm going to see that rule when it goes to LCAR, but it would be extremely helpful if this committee could understand the direction that you're going, maybe a summary of the rules or the rules that are applicable to what we're just talking about would be very helpful.
I'll do that.
Okay, maybe there is a benefit to being on LCAR. That's an insider joke. Okay. Emily, thank you. Appreciate it. And we're gonna move on to an update on the Kern-Hatton claims and hear from Kim Dougherty, who's Justice Law Collaborative partner. And Kim, thank you for being here. It's good to see you again. You've heard the discussion and the information, but I think it would be very helpful for you to set the table for us, and in particular, the members of the committee who haven't been engaged in learning about Kern-Hatton over the last session, and just give us an update of where things stand at this point from your perspective.
Thank you, Chair Lyons, Vice Chair Pugh, Senator Sears, and other members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you all today regarding Kern-Hatton, our developments that we've worked through, and also just to further comment on the concerns that you all have that we share. And we appreciate very much the concerns that have been raised today regarding gaps in oversight. And additionally, even when there is oversight, it not being sufficient to ensure the safety and welfare of children. I think what's been presented today has made it quite clear that when you have a residential treatment center or home that is not approved by DCF or licensed by DCF, children are in harm's way. There is no one who is going into those cottages, checking on these children at night. And I will note that the decades after decades of abuse were not happening in the classroom. The Agency of Education fully just stated that their only oversight that they can provide is to the educational capacity, nothing to do with the residential. And that is exactly the problem here and why this Kern-Hatton tragedy happened in the first place. There is no one there looking outside the classroom, overseeing what is happening. This abuse that was quite clear throughout all the DCF documents, the state police records that have been made publicly available, it's evident, was not happening in a classroom. And that therein lies the big problem that needs change, where regulation needs to come in, rules needs to come in. This committee, and I'd be happy to participate and help if there's going to be a task force of some form, needs to come in and bridge that gap and ensure, even when there is oversight, that oversight is sufficient to ensure that children are safe. I will note that I am equally perplexed and flabbergasted by the Agency of Education's findings. I will tell you that the Agency of Education did find in their report that Kern-Hatton had violated rules regarding reporting of child abuse and that they violated regulations regarding background checks. But yet there is no repercussion to that other than, checking in with them 2 additional times. So, in order to ensure this doesn't happen again anywhere, not just at Kern-Hatton, but in any school in Vermont, there needs to be significant change to the statutes and there needs to be significant change to the rules. So I just had to say that because I felt like it was something that was very obvious through this hearing, and something that I really appreciate, and I know the survivors appreciate this committee paying close attention to and being committed to bring about the change to ensure this sort of thing doesn't happen in the future. With respect to where things are in our claim process, we have been, as we have been for the past year, working together diligently, participating in the independent investigation that has been going on. We've provided an inordinate amount of information, documentary and testimonial, to the independent investigators for over the past year. The investigation itself is subject to a confidentiality agreement, so I'm not able to really comment on the substance of the investigation. However, I can tell you that the survivors and myself are frustrated that it's been over a year now, and this investigation is continuing, is ongoing, and has not finalized. And we're hoping that as we continue to cooperate and be patient, that ultimately we will have this investigation finalized, that the report eventually will be made public, that's by agreement, and that the findings and recommendations hopefully will effectuate some additional change that needs to happen at the homes, and maybe set a good precedent for other schools that are both educational and residential homes. The last time we spoke, Senator Lyons, and I know Representative Lyons and Senator Sears, we had talked about a potential support group for the survivors, similar to the St. Joseph's Orphanage. And so we've spent a lot of time this summer working really hard on putting together a very thoughtful and well-researched proposal for that support group. And so we've provided that to you all to share with the committee and whomever else needs to see the proposal. But essentially it sets forth the purpose of the group, the format of the support group, which would include 1 to 2 sessions a month, one psychoeducational session to talk about, what is betrayal trauma, to teach people what those terms are. It helps survivors to be able to identify and think, okay, well, now I know why I felt that way at that time, and to be educated and giving them words for their feelings that we think are helpful. That's just one session. And then the second session monthly will be an actual support group session where people can get together and discuss their feelings and their mutual experiences. So we also included in the proposal the intended members, which would be any survivor of abuse at Kernhatten, and also the facilitators of that support group, who are experts in the field of betrayal trauma, childhood abuse, and also social group dynamics, Dr. Melissa Foynes and Dr. Matthew Munich. And we attached their CVs to that proposal for the committee to review. They've also been really thoughtful in putting together ground rules that will ensure the safety of the members and the well-being of the members throughout the process of being involved in these sessions. And also a method for evaluating the group, its needs, and the success and ways that it can change to better serve the members. We've also put in a part of that proposal, the resources that will be provided to the members, and also the financial element breakdown in terms of how that the funding would be used for the year ahead. And so we look forward to hearing from the legislators and answering any questions we can about the support group or any other matter that's been addressed today. And appreciate, again, just always being able to be involved, because the voice of survivors are important here. It's important for them to know that you all care and that you are all ready and committed to making the change happen in the future, so this sort of thing doesn't happen again. So we thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. We're very pleased that we can sort of elevate the conversation to a place of solving the problem for the future. We all understand the dire straits that some former students were placed in, and that they are continuing to be influenced by. So our goal here is, as we said, we want to find some of the ways to plug the gaps and to move forward on this. And so I'm going to open it up for questions from our committee members, and then I may have a question. So
Thank you.
go ahead, Representative Jessup.
Thank you, Attorney Doherty. I am not sitting on either of the policy committees, so apologies if this is well-trodden ground for others. But you referenced the confidential independent investigation, and what has struck me about this testimony this afternoon is you have the state police here and it's fallen, you have the Agency of Education, it's fallen, you have DCF and it's fallen. So given this triangle of dropped balls, in my personal opinion, where is the responsibility for this independent investigation? Where does it lie? Who's paying for it? Who's accountable to the output? Can you talk to that?
I don't know that I have all the answers for that. I do know that Kern-Hatton is involved in participating in the independent investigation along with the survivors. And I believe it would probably be better for their counsel to maybe answer some of those questions, but it is an independent investigation. It is something that both sides are participating in. And so in terms of I'm hopeful that a ball will not be dropped here. But it's yet to be seen. The outcome of the investigation and the report is still ongoing. So I can't comment as to how it will end up. But we are hopeful that by complying and providing all the information that we have to the independent investigators, that they will be able to make the findings and recommendations necessary to attain, in your words, that accountability.
Right, and if I could follow up, what I guess I'm still not understanding, and again, apologies if others know this already, I understand what you're saying about the investigation, but where is it? Is it housed anywhere in state government? Or for example, is this an independent investigator that was hired by the Attorney General? Is this an independent investigator that was hired by a federal agency? I don't understand where the funding flows for the investigation came from.
Yeah, I do not believe it was the AG's office. I would defer to Kern-Hatton's counsel to answer the funding question. It's not, obviously the survivors are not funding it, they're just participating in it.
Okay,
Good question, Representative Jessup. It was a very good question. Thank you.
It is, and I'm personally, bound by confidentiality. So I do believe any questions that are relevant to, sort of the setup of the independent investigator or any funding for it is better served to be placed upon counsel for Kern-Hatton. I apologize that I'm not able to answer those types of questions.
Senator
But I will
Sears,
say that, if we're talking, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please finish, Kim. Go ahead.
I will say, our concern obviously is to ensure that this independent investigation goes well and that there are findings and recommendations that will ensure safety moving forward at the school. We are committed to that. We've been participating in this investigation with the hopes of avoiding any potential litigation or civil suits. However, if we find and the survivors find that they're not satisfied, we always have the avenue of proceeding in the justice system with the courts. We're hoping that we can work together to try to bring an end and closure to the tragedies that happened to these survivors. Short of that, because it's difficult for them to have to go through that process as well. But if they are not satisfied, we are prepared to do what we need to do to represent them in the civil system moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Representative Pugh,
Sorry, I seem to be very confused today. So there was, I'm not sure, an investigation or a report that the Agency of Education Council just referenced, and which is public, because I can find it on
The AOE investigation.
the AOE. So there was an AOE investigation that's done,
Criminal investigation.
and now there's an independent, and we don't know who put that in place.
Kern Hatton did put it in place. They've put information on their own public website indicating that they would have an independent investigation performed. That information is public. In terms of the substance of the independent investigation, that's not something that I am able to discuss at this time. So it's in place. Kern Hatton put it in place. It's on their website that they had said that they're willing to investigate this to try to uncover what had happened. But in terms of, like I said, funding and things like that, it's not something I'm able to answer.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be obstructionist. I just am bound by a confidentiality agreement. And I know counsel for Kern Hatton is listening in, I'm sure, and making sure I don't violate any of that. So, but I do encourage you to, I encourage you to invite them next time there is a meeting, and, ask your questions directly.
Well, we may actually do that to help inform us about what would be helpful to them to help keep the kids safe going forward. So obviously, this is the beginning for us in terms of trying to plug the holes, so to speak. Senator Sears, questions, comments?
No, I think it actually leaves me, looking for, and it's a solution that needs to take into account the education committees, and its council, the health and welfare or human services committee, and the judiciary committees, because what has been exposed by both St. Joseph's and by Kern Hatton are huge gaps in the system. And I'm reminded that in many cases, kids were intimidated not to report the abuse in both places. And our investigation abilities into those situations where there were no reports of abuse because the kids were intimidated not to make reports is where we're failing. But I'm also really concerned once DCF says that it's not a residential treatment center anymore, then that level of oversight is gone. And so I think that we need to have the three committees, or at least recommend to the three committees that they begin to work on how to fill in some of these gaps to prevent future.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's where we're headed. We can make some initial recommendations, but when it comes to education, it'll have to land in the House and Senate Education Committees. And, but I think we have some insight into where some decisions have to be made, but we'll know more after our next couple of meetings.
But I would like to know if our laws regarding the failure to report abuse by mandatory reporters are strong enough. And that's both judiciary and human services.
Well, it just seems to me that $500 is not a lot.
No, particularly if there's a pattern of abuse. And, for kids that are intimidated, it's totally understandable. In both cases, I mean, there's so much that we need to do to prevent that from happening in the future. That's what I hope we learn from all this.
Exactly. Thank you. Any other questions? Kim, anything else, any insight that you can share with us or that might be helpful? And I'll say whatever you can finish up today, but then as we go forward, we will be hearing from others and would greatly appreciate any suggestions that you could make to us as we look to fill the gaps.
Yeah, I'd be happy to continue to participate in whatever way I can to help ensure nothing like this happens again. I will say in other instances, for example, with the USA Gymnastics, I worked really hard on the non-monetary commitments that we were reached related to change in the future. And it almost could serve sort of as a framework moving forward where you have a task force that's put together and some form of restorative justice, and you have experts involved that can make the suggestions to the group where, you know, the regulations, it just working together, because I feel that there's obviously issues with regulations and rules and gaps there, but implementation process is another piece of this, where experts can help with that to ensure that the meaning behind whatever rules and whatever regulations you all come up with are actually implemented in a way that does make that difference. So I'd be happy to continue to work with you all. I think this is the bright side of it, is anticipating positive change throughout the state of Vermont and throughout the school systems so that this doesn't happen again. So that's the part that is really meaningful, I think, for the survivors. That's what they care about the most. So we'd be happy to provide our thoughts throughout this process. Anything you all need, we're here for you. And we appreciate you including us.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Attorney Doherty, one other, I'm just racking my brain. I'm thinking systemically of where are the potential pressure points. And in Vermont, one of the things that we're considering is the Office of the Child Advocate. And it remains to be seen how that unfolds. But have you in other states seen, and maybe it's not called that, maybe it's something else, that in the existing boxes of government, there is somehow an advocate role that has been effective, and that potentially in situations like this with overlapping jurisdiction has proven useful?
I think that's absolutely right. And part of it is they are an independent party who can come in and has no real true connection to approval for education or approval for residential. And they can be a true independent that could be there to provide sort of a conduit with the students and the residents and the state. That's separate and apart for that. So I think that's a wonderful idea to think about including that agency as well, to be that conduit in between all of the different stakeholders and moving parts.
Thank you. Now that bill is in the Senate Health and Welfare Committee, and it is something I've been thinking about in terms of these issues before us. So we'll see what happens with that. Perhaps this committee might be able to make some recommendations around that, especially given that you folks have already been through the bill. It'll be helpful. Any other comments or questions? This time. Well, we've had a full dose, and I think it's we understand the need to do what we can, and we don't ever want to see this happen again in our state. There's no question about it. Whether it comes to fruition, whether the allegations become supported or not. So I'm not a judge and a jury, but I do think we are all very concerned when allegations like this surface, and we don't want them to surface again. We want to make sure that we prevent this going forward. So thank you very much, and we will stay connected with you as we go forward. So appreciate your time. Thank you, Kim.
Well, it's my pleasure and honor and privilege. Thank you. And thank you for the support.
Terrific. We're smiling behind our masks.
Excellent.
Senator Sears is smiling, but he doesn't have a mask.
Yeah, I can see.
I don't need one from Marley.
Right.
The dog is nearby.
That's good. Good comfort. Okay, so we've gotten to the point in our agenda where would have a discussion. So I'm going to open it up. I do have a list of some of the things that people have suggested we look at next time, or not next time and maybe the time after. And I've got the Family First Plan. Certainly we're not finished with that yet. We need to see it, and we need to ask our questions and have maybe some recommendations. And then going to the whole issue around independent school licensure and approval as a residential facility from DCF. We certainly want to go through policy 241 and the rules. We want to look at this education and what can happen through the AOE or the state board in terms of protecting children, not just the educational program. And that is something, whatever recommendation we make relative to education or to mandatory reporting, some of that is going to have to go to the Ed Committee, and some of that will have to go to the Judiciary Committee. So we can get a start on it, but it will be other committees that finish it off.
I do have to admit, as we talk about the educational institutions that are residential.
Yeah.
The fact that, and this has nothing to do, I guess, with us in terms of policy focus, but the fact that the Agency of Education says we're only talking about their education, which I have translated, that they translate to mean the classes. I never went to like overnight school. But my understanding is that if you go to a school where you sleep, they have certain expectations, like from this time to this time is study time, and this time to this, they also have fun times and after school, but activities just the way you do in school. So how the Agency of Education can say that what happens after 4 or whatever is of no consequence, I don't get at all, because I think that people who send their kids to residential schools assume that there is something happening after 4 o'clock.
They may have expectations.
But they may have expectations that there's something educational happening after 4 o'clock.
Yeah.
But I'm not on the education committee. I just can say that here.
Oh, well, I could say.
But I think that highlights the problem. And I think you picked right up on it, Representative Pugh. And both of these cases, St. Joseph's and Manhattan, basically had vulnerable kids too. And that just exasperates the problem and the lack of oversight.
Exactly. And when we think of, go ahead.
No, I think that's what we should be focusing on and how to prevent in the future. It's always difficult to hear the stories of those young people. But one of the most difficult parts, what other adults knew and didn't report. And that's what scares me about the lack of oversight by the Department of Education of these residential schools, is that that level of intimidation, the level of, don't rock the boat would still be there. if there is no oversight, particularly when it's just DOE.
Yes, it's a very lonely feeling out there when when there's no oversight. I just wonder what parents think when they're sending their kids to a residential program out of state, especially for the younger kids, you know. And as Representative Pugh said, what are their expectations? What are they told? Wait, I've made a list of some things we should be looking at probably, and I'll talk with Katie McClin. Katie's still there. Thank you. And I'll talk with Katie about getting some information out and then inviting some folks in so we can start making our recommendations. I think we have to look at the statutes a little bit, look at the policy and the rules, and at least in a couple cases. And then in terms of the mandatory reporting piece, we didn't talk a lot about that, but we probably should. That'll fall into the laps of all three committees: Judiciary, Health and Welfare, or Human Services, and Education, I think. And how do we enforce that? And how do we keep people from intimidating? How do you define that? I'll let Judiciary define intimidation. I don't know. And then, so I'll try to put some stuff together, and we'll build our agenda around a more robust discussion on each of the topics that we wanted to look at. And if you have ideas, I'll try and get something out to you. And then Katie and I will work together, get something out, and then we'll plug in other ideas. Peggy, yes.
I just want to remind you, you have the UVM report from 12 to 3 at the next meeting.
Oh, we do. Thank you very much. Yes, we have a joint meeting with the Justice Oversight Committee from 12 to 3 on October 29th, and we'll meet ahead of that. Well, not 12 to 3, 1 to 3.
I think they had told me 12 to 3.
We'll talk.
Okay.
Okay.
And the whole quorum thing, I don't know if you.
I know the quorum thing. Okay.
Want to let you know.
Well, so what we'll try to do, yeah, go ahead, Senator.
I will make it be in person on the 29th.
Oh, good. That would be
But,
great. I mean, yeah.
Peggy, have you sent out the invitation to the Justice Oversight Committee?
For the 29th?
Yeah.
Yeah, Alice Evans has it. I don't know.
Okay.
whether-
I did. I'm 99% sure I did. Yep.
I don't.
Let me see. I'll look on my calendar so I can tell you.
Yeah, we should probably get that on people's calendars.
Yeah.
It's on mine. I just checked.
All right.
Can I, in terms of talking about the Kern-Hatton situation, and I don't remember the name of the organization that, Emily Simmons said was a part of the rule that AOE is, or that the State Board of Ed is suggesting to be an oversight body for residential schools for the residential piece, but it might be good to hear from them about what their regulations are and what they consider to be best practice and their process.
Well,
I mean, it's not in place yet, but if that's the recommendation, that might be helpful to hear.
Do you remember the name of the organization?
Unfortunately, I don't. And I didn't write it down, but I'm
Maybe
sure we could.
find it. Peggy, can you reach out to Emily Simmons and ask her for the name of that organization? But that's a very good idea. We can maybe invite them in.
Which organization? I was doing something else. Sorry.
There was Emily Simmons that the State Board of Ed was recommending a rule about approved independent schools having
Accreditation.
yeah,
Yeah.
with a organization, and I don't remember.
Yeah, it
the
was
name.
NC something or other.
Yeah.
Here's something.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, it's NEASC. I'm sorry, it's NEASC.
Oh, it's just the National Educational
Independent,
Independent School.
private. I'm sorry.
I'll ask her.
Yeah.
Well, you know, on
School
Google,
Association.
on Google, it's the National Independent Private Schools Association. NIPSA.
There you go.
But it is, but what is it?
But
We
in,
don't know their presence in Vermont. We'll have Emily Simmons come back in and talk about that.
I don't mean to interrupt. I put in the chat a link to the organization. I've been sitting in on the rule change hearings. It's NEASC, New England Association of Schools and Colleges. I'm pretty sure that's the one. Yeah.
thank you.
Who said that? Was that
This
Kim?
is, yes, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
That's a,
It's interesting. NEASC at the tertiary level is peer-reviewed delegations going through accreditation of independent colleges. So I don't know how it,
Well,
I didn't know.
But we're
they-
sort
how it fits in.
we'll try to sort out who's providing residential something oversight. I think we wanted to be a little more local. And to have, most of these accreditation organizations demand that you put together a portfolio, 1,000 pages, and then they come in for 3 days and then they go away. So,
Yeah, and the one that I told you about is for private schools, and you have to be for-profit.
oh, before private school, okay.
So not that one.
Oh, we know. Okay, but good point.
Thanks.
Okay, so that's a plan. Katie, are you there? Yes, oh, good.
Yeah, yep.
So can you and I communicate sometime relatively soon, and we'll try to consolidate our interests and see how we can look at the specific issues that we have and maybe send out some information. I don't know, but maybe about the statutes or the rules, or try and access the policy 241, just so we can inform ourselves, so that we can have a deeper dive discussion to make recommendations. We'll do that. Now I'm looking at you. We can do that next week sometime.
Sure. I'll send you an email and try to set something up.
Perfect. Okay, sounds good. All right. Anything else?